In a quiet little town surrounded by lush green hills and thick woods, Lieutenant Sarah Callahan was going about her day. She wasn't there for vacation or relaxation. She had an important job to do. As part of her military K-9 unit, she was conducting routine training exercises with her two loyal companions, Titan and Blaze, both Belgian Malinois known for their strength, speed, and intelligence. These dogs weren't just pets. They were highly trained professionals who worked alongside soldiers in some of the toughest situations imaginable. Sarah herself was no ordinary handler. Standing at just over 5 feet tall, she didn't look like someone you'd expect to command such powerful animals. But appearances can be deceiving. Years of hard work, dedication, and countless hours spent training had earned her the respect of her peers within the military. Outside those circles, however, things were different. People often underestimated her because of her size and calm demeanor. They assumed she couldn't possibly handle beasts as formidable as Titan and Blaze. Little did they know, she was more than capable, and today would prove it. On this particular afternoon, Sarah decided to take Titan and Blaze for a walk along the edge of town. It was supposed to be a peaceful break from intense drills, a chance for the dogs to stretch their legs while staying alert. The weather was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a light breeze rustling through the trees. Everything seemed quiet and serene until Sarah heard the unmistakable roar of motorcycles in the distance. Turning a corner near an old, abandoned gas station, she came face to face with a group of bikers. Their bikes were parked haphazardly, and their leather jackets gleamed under the sun. The leader of the group, a towering man with tattoos covering his arms and a scruffy beard, stood out immediately. His name was Hawk, and he exuded an air of arrogance that made Sarah cautious. Hawk noticed Sarah right away. At first, his gaze flickered curiously over her uniform, then landed on Titan and Blaze. Instead of admiration, though, his expression turned mocking. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for his friends to hear. "Look what we've got here, a little lady playing soldier." His voice dripped with sarcasm, and the other bikers chuckled, joining in the ridicule. One of them joked about how Sarah probably needed help carrying her puppies, while another wondered aloud if she even knew how to give commands. Sarah didn't react. She kept walking steadily, keeping one hand lightly resting on Titan's leash and the other on Blaze's. Both dogs stayed perfectly still, their ears perked up and eyes scanning the scene ahead. To anyone unfamiliar with working dogs, they might have looked relaxed, but Sarah knew better. Titan and Blaze were ready for anything, their instincts sharp and their loyalty unwavering. Still, the bikers pressed on, clearly enjoying themselves. Hawk stepped closer, blocking Sarah's path. "Hey, sweetheart," he sneered, "you sure those mutts are worth all that fancy gear? Looks like they'd run away if I so much as snapped my fingers." Sarah finally stopped, meeting Hawk's gaze without flinching. Her voice was steady and calm when she spoke. "These mutts, as you call them, are elite military dogs. They're trained to protect, track, and apprehend threats. So unless you want to find out exactly what they're capable of, I suggest you move aside." For a moment, there was silence. Then Hawk threw his head back and laughed, his crew following suit. None of them believed her. Not really. To them, Sarah was just a small woman trying to sound tough. What they didn't realize was that sometimes the quietest voices carried the most authority. And Sarah was about to show them why. As Sarah and her dogs made their way back to the base, the fading sunlight painted the sky in hues of orange and pink. The quiet hum of nature surrounded them, crickets chirping, leaves rustling in the gentle breeze, and the occasional distant call of a bird settling down for the night. It was a stark contrast to the chaos of earlier that day, and Sarah found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. What started as a simple walk with Titan and Blaze had turned into an unexpected lesson about respect, humility, and the power of first impressions. Back at the base, she led her dogs to their kennels, ensuring they were comfortable after their eventful outing. Both Titan and Blaze seemed content, wagging their tails and leaning into her touch as she praised them for their performance. "You two were amazing today," she said softly, scratching behind their ears. "I couldn't ask for better partners." They responded with soft whines of affection before curling up in their beds, ready to rest after a long day. Once the dogs were settled, Sarah headed to her quarters, where she finally allowed herself to unwind. Sitting on the edge of her cot, she replayed the encounter with the bikers in her mind. She thought about how quickly things could have escalated if she'd let her emotions get the better of her, or if Hawk's crew had refused to back down. But instead, cooler heads prevailed, and what could have been a dangerous confrontation ended peacefully. That wasn't always the case in her line of work, and she knew how fortunate she was to walk away without incident. Her thoughts drifted to the bigger picture. Encounters like this weren't just about proving herself or showcasing her dog's skills. They were about breaking stereotypes and fostering understanding. People often judged others based on appearances, whether it was underestimating a petite woman handling large military dogs or dismissing someone because of their tattoos and leather jackets. Today, both sides had learned not to jump to conclusions too quickly. For Sarah, that was the real victory. She also reflected on the importance of discipline, not just for her dogs, but for herself. Handling high-stress situations required patience, focus, and emotional control. If she'd reacted impulsively or defensively during the bikers' taunts, the outcome might have been very different. Instead, she relied on her training and trusted her instincts, allowing Titan and Blaze to demonstrate their capabilities without unnecessary aggression. That balance between assertiveness and restraint was something she worked hard to maintain, and today proved it was worth every effort. Later that evening, as she sat outside her quarters watching the stars appear one by one, Sarah realized how much these moments shaped her perspective. Every interaction, whether positive or challenging, added depth to her understanding of people and herself. She didn't seek out confrontations, but when they came, she embraced them as opportunities to grow and teach. In many ways, her role extended beyond being a handler. She was also an ambassador for her unit, representing the values of teamwork, respect, and professionalism wherever she went. Titan and Blaze played a crucial part in that mission. Their loyalty, intelligence, and unwavering dedication inspired those around them, even skeptics like Hawk and his gang. Together, the three of them formed a bond stronger than words, a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. And while Sarah knew there would always be challenges ahead, she faced them with confidence, knowing she had two incredible companions by her side. As she gazed up at the night sky, Sarah smiled to herself. Life as a K-9 handler wasn't easy. It demanded sacrifices, resilience, and constant vigilance. But it was rewarding in ways few other jobs could be. Teaching lessons, earning respect, and making connections with unlikely allies reminded her why she chose this path in the first place. Tonight, as the world grew still and peaceful, she felt grateful for the journey and excited for whatever lay ahead. As the sound of the bikers' engines faded into the distance, Sarah took a moment to breathe in the quiet solitude of the clearing. The adrenaline from the encounter was beginning to ebb away, leaving behind a sense of calm satisfaction. Titan and Blaze seemed equally relaxed now, their earlier intensity replaced by contentment as they trotted alongside her. They had done what they were trained to do. Nothing more, nothing less, and in doing so, they had taught a group of skeptical men a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Sarah glanced back at the spot where the bikers had stood just moments ago. She couldn't help but feel a small pang of pride, not because she'd proven herself superior, but because she'd managed to turn hostility into understanding. These weren't bad people at their core. They were simply products of their environment, used to asserting dominance and feeding off bravado. Today, though, they'd been humbled, not through cruelty or malice, but through respect and professionalism. That made all the difference. Her thoughts drifted to Hawk, whose transformation had been the most striking. From his initial mockery to his eventual apology, he'd shown a level of introspection that few would have expected from someone like him. It reminded Sarah of something her commanding officer once told her. People aren't always who they appear to be on the surface. Sometimes you have to dig deeper to find the good underneath. Today, she'd seen glimpses of that goodness in Hawk and his crew, buried beneath layers of arrogance and posturing. And while it might take time for them to fully embrace this newfound perspective, she believed the seed had been planted. As she walked, Titan suddenly perked up, his ears swiveling toward a faint noise coming from the edge of the clearing. Following his gaze, Sarah noticed one of the bikers returning on foot, a younger man with scruffy hair and an oversized leather jacket. It was Rattler, the same guy who had volunteered to face Titan and Blaze earlier. He approached cautiously, his hands raised slightly in a gesture of peace. "Hey," he called out, his voice hesitant. "I know you're probably ready to get back to whatever it is you do, but I wanted to say thanks." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face him, curious about what he meant. "Thanks for what?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. Rattler shuffled his feet, clearly uncomfortable but determined to speak his mind. "For not letting those dogs go full throttle on me," he admitted with a sheepish grin. "Could have ended way worse than a little dirt on my jeans. Honestly, I didn't think much of you when we first met. But, well, you handled yourself better than anyone else would have in your shoes." Sarah smiled faintly, appreciating the honesty behind his words. "It's okay," she said. "Like I told your friends, it wasn't about teaching a hard lesson. It was about showing respect. You learned something today, and so did I." Rattler nodded thoughtfully, then gestured toward Titan and Blaze. "Those two are incredible," he said, admiration creeping into his tone. "Never seen anything like 'em. If you ever need backup, or, I dunno, someone to clean up after him, I'm your guy." He chuckled nervously, scratching the back of his neck. Sarah laughed softly, touched by the unexpected camaraderie. "I'll keep that in mind," she replied. "But for now, just remember what we talked about. Respect goes a long way, whether it's for people or animals." With a final nod, Rattler turned and jogged back toward his bike, disappearing into the trees. Watching him leave, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Encounters like this reminded her why she loved her job, not just for the thrill of working with elite dogs like Titan and Blaze, but for the opportunities to connect with others and challenge preconceived notions. By the time she reached the edge of the forest, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The day had been eventful, to say the least, but it had also been meaningful. As Titan and Blaze trotted happily beside her, their tails wagging in unison, Sarah felt grateful for moments like these, moments that bridged gaps, broke down barriers, and reminded her of the power of mutual respect. The bikers' laughter echoed through the quiet clearing, their voices loud and grating against the peaceful backdrop of the forest. Hawk leaned back on his motorcycle, crossing his arms as he smirked at Sarah. His crew stood around him, egging each other on with crude jokes about her uniform and dogs. "Military dog handler." "Yeah, right," one of them snickered, shaking his head. Another chimed in, saying, "Bet she couldn't even handle a chihuahua, let alone these big boys." The insults kept coming, growing more exaggerated and ridiculous with every passing second. Sarah didn't flinch. She remained calm, her eyes steady and focused. Her hand rested lightly on Titan's leash, while Blaze sat silently beside her, his intelligent gaze fixed on the bikers. To anyone watching closely, it was clear that the dogs weren't fazed by the commotion. In fact, they seemed almost eerily composed, like coiled springs waiting for a signal to spring into action. But the bikers didn't notice or care. All they saw was a petite woman standing in front of two large dogs, and that image struck them as laughable. Hawk stepped forward again, his boots crunching on the gravel beneath him. He pointed a finger at Sarah, his tone dripping with mockery. "You know what I think," he said, pausing dramatically for effect. "I think you're all show and no substance. Those dogs probably don't listen to you any better than my cat listens to me telling it to stay off the couch." His friends burst out laughing, slapping their knees, and nodding in agreement. One of them shouted, "Yeah, prove us wrong. Show us how tough your elite military dogs really are." Despite their taunts, Sarah stayed silent. She knew better than to rise to the bait. Years of training had taught her that reacting emotionally would only escalate the situation. Instead, she focused on controlling her breathing, keeping her mind sharp and alert. She also knew her dogs were watching her every move, taking cues from her body language and tone of voice. If she showed even a hint of nervousness or hesitation, it could affect their behavior, and Sarah wasn't about to let that happen. But the bikers misinterpreted her silence as weakness. Emboldened by her lack of response, they grew bolder. One of them crouched down, snapping his fingers and making kissy noises to try and get Blaze's attention. "Come on, boy," he teased, grinning at his buddies. "Don't be shy. Come say hi to Uncle Biker." Blaze didn't so much as twitch, his golden eyes locked firmly on Sarah. Another biker grabbed a stick from the ground and waved it in front of Titan, trying to provoke him into chasing it. Still, the dog didn't react. This only fueled the bikers' frustration. They wanted a reaction, any reaction, that would justify their teasing. When none came, they turned their attention back to Sarah. "What's the matter, sweetheart?" Hawk jeered, leaning closer. "Afraid your little puppers will embarrass themselves. Or maybe you're scared we'll figure out you're not as tough as you pretend to be." At this point, Sarah finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but carried an undeniable authority that made everyone pause. "Mock all you want," she said evenly, meeting Hawk's gaze without blinking. "But understand something. Titan and Blaze aren't here for entertainment. They're trained professionals, and they respond to commands, not chaos. If you'd like to see what they're capable of, I can arrange that. But once we start, there's no going back." For a brief moment, doubt flickered across Hawk's face. He glanced at the dogs, noticing for the first time the intensity in their eyes and the way their muscles tensed beneath their sleek coats. Then he shook it off, dismissing Sarah's warning as another attempt to sound intimidating. "Oh, come on," he scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. "You're bluffing. Ain't nobody scared of a couple of overgrown puppies." Sarah didn't argue further. She simply tightened her grip on the leashes and gave the bikers a long, measured look. Deep down, she hoped they'd leave it at that. But she also knew that people like Hawk rarely backed down once they started something. And sure enough, the challenge was coming, whether she liked it or not. The clearing was eerily quiet after the demonstration, the kind of silence that follows something extraordinary, something no one expected. Rattler stood there awkwardly, brushing dirt off his jacket and avoiding eye contact with anyone. His earlier bravado had completely evaporated, replaced by a mix of embarrassment and disbelief. He muttered under his breath, something about not expecting it to be so fast. But his voice trailed off as he realized everyone was staring at him, including Hawk. Hawk, for his part, looked like someone had just knocked the wind out of him. His arms were still crossed, but now they seemed more like a shield than a display of confidence. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a furrowed brow and a tight jaw. The other bikers shuffled uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. Some scratched their heads, others kicked at the dirt, but none of them dared to speak. It was as if the entire group had collectively been slapped awake from their arrogant haze. Sarah, on the other hand, remained calm and composed. She knelt beside Titan and Blaze, running her hands gently over their sleek coats to check for any signs of strain or injury. Both dogs responded eagerly, leaning into her touch and wagging their tails slightly, clearly pleased with themselves. Satisfied that her team was unharmed, she straightened up and turned her attention back to the bikers. Her expression wasn't smug or triumphant. It was matter-of-fact, as if she'd simply done her job. "That's what happens when you underestimate training and discipline," Sarah said, her voice steady and clear. She gestured toward Titan and Blaze, who were sitting patiently at her side. "These dogs aren't just pets, they're professionals. They've undergone years of rigorous training to handle situations far more dangerous than this. Their power doesn't come from aggression. It comes from focus, teamwork, and precision. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The bikers exchanged uneasy looks, some nodding slowly while others avoided her gaze altogether. One of them, a lanky guy with a bandana tied around his forehead, spoke up hesitantly. So, they could have hurt him worse if they wanted to. Sarah nodded. Yes, they could have. But my priority is always control, not chaos. That's why we train them to neutralize threats without causing permanent damage. Still, make no mistake, they're capable of much more if the situation demands it. Her tone left little room for doubt, and the gravity of her statement settled over the group like a weight. Rattler finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than before. I didn't think they'd move that fast, he admitted, shaking his head. 1 second I'm standing there, feeling good, and the next thing I know, I'm flat on my back. Didn't even see him coming. That's the point, Sarah replied evenly. Speed and surprise are key elements of their training. By the time you realize what's happening, it's already too late. And trust me, they weren't using their full potential here today. This comment made several of the bikers visibly tense. A few took instinctive steps backward, as if suddenly realizing how close they'd been to those same jaws and claws. Even Hawk shifted uncomfortably, his usual swagger nowhere to be seen. For the first time since the encounter began, he actually looked unsure of himself. You've got skills, lady, Hawk said gruffly, breaking the silence. There was no mockery in his voice now, just reluctant respect. And your dogs, well, there's something else. Guess we underestimated you. Sarah met his gaze without flinching. Underestimating people based on appearances is a mistake, she said firmly. It doesn't matter how big or tough someone looks, or how small and harmless they seem. What matters is preparation, experience, and knowing your strengths. If you remember that, maybe next time you'll think twice before picking a fight. Her words struck a chord with the group. Though none of them said anything immediately, it was obvious they were processing what had happened. The mocking energy that had filled the clearing earlier was gone, replaced by a newfound respect, and perhaps a healthy dose of caution. As Sarah gathered her things and prepared to leave, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about proving herself. It was about teaching a lesson. And judging by the looks on their faces, the bikers had learned it well. The clearing buzzed with anticipation as the bikers formed a loose circle around Sarah, Titan, Blaze, and Rattler. The atmosphere had shifted from mocking laughter to an uneasy tension, though the bikers still wore their bravado-like armor. Hawk stood at the edge of the group, arms crossed, his eyes darting between Sarah and her dogs. He tried to project confidence, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his expression, a tiny crack in his otherwise impenetrable facade. Rattler, for his part, seemed oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around him. He strutted into the middle of the clearing, flexing his arms and rolling his shoulders as if he were preparing for a wrestling match. His leather gloves creaked as he clenched and unclenched his fists, and he even pulled out a wooden baton from his belt, twirling it dramatically. "All right, lady," he said, flashing a cocky grin at Sarah. "Let's see what your mutts can do. But don't cry when they run away with their tails between their legs." Sarah didn't respond. Instead, she focused on positioning Titan and Blaze strategically. With a series of soft commands and subtle hand signals, she guided them to either side of Rattler, creating a triangular formation. Both dogs moved with precision, their movements fluid and deliberate. They didn't bark or growl. Instead, they remained eerily silent, their golden eyes locked onto Rattler like predators sizing up prey. This unnerved him more than he cared to admit, though he masked it with another swaggering comment. "What's the matter, boys? Too scared to make a move?" Sarah stepped back slightly, ensuring she was out of the way, but still within earshot to give commands. She glanced at Rattler one last time, her tone calm but firm. "Remember, this is just a demonstration. My dogs won't harm you permanently. They're trained for non-lethal takedowns. But once I give the command, things will happen quickly. Are you sure you're ready?" Rattler scoffed, waving her off. Yeah. Let's get on with it already. Stop stalling." His voice carried false bravado, but his shifting weight and darting eyes betrayed his growing unease. Some of the other bikers exchanged glances, murmuring quietly among themselves. A few looked skeptical, while others seemed genuinely curious about what would happen next. Satisfied that everyone understood the stakes, Sarah raised her whistle to her lips, a small, unassuming silver object that belied its importance. She blew a single sharp blast, followed by a clear command, "Engage." In an instant, Titan and Blaze sprang into action. Their transformation was startling. One moment, they were statuesque and composed. The next, they were blurs of motion, closing the distance between themselves and Rattler with astonishing speed. Rattler barely had time to react. Before he could raise his baton or take a defensive stance, Titan lunged forward, targeting his upper body with pinpoint accuracy. At the same time, Blaze circled low, cutting off any chance of escape. Within seconds, Rattler found himself pinned to the ground, his arms restrained by Titan's powerful jaws, and his legs immobilized by Blaze's strategic positioning. The entire process took less than 10 seconds. The clearing fell deathly silent. The bikers stared in shock, their mouths agape, as Rattler lay sprawled on the dirt, completely immobilized. For all his posturing and confidence, he hadn't lasted even half a minute against the disciplined teamwork of Titan and Blaze. Panic flashed across his face as he realized how effortlessly the dogs had taken him down. Okay, he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "I'm done. Call them off." Sarah gave a sharp whistle and called out, "Release." Instantly, Titan and Blaze backed off, retreating to her side with perfect obedience. They sat calmly beside her, panting lightly but otherwise showing no signs of aggression. Rattler scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt off his clothes and avoiding eye contact with anyone. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by embarrassment and relief. Hawk, who had been watching intently, finally broke the silence. "Well, Dan," he muttered, scratching the back of his neck. The rest of the bikers murmured in agreement, their skepticism melting away as they processed what they'd just witnessed. What had started as a taunting challenge had turned into a humbling lesson, one none of them would soon forget. The tension in the air was palpable as Hawk and his gang exchanged glances, their smirks turning into something more calculating. They weren't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked as unassuming as Sarah. But her calm confidence had planted a seed of doubt in their minds, even if they refused to admit it. Determined to regain control of the situation, Hawk decided to push things further. He stepped closer, his shadow looming over Sarah, and crossed his arms with exaggerated nonchalance. "All right, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying a mix of mockery and curiosity. "Let's say we take you up on that little offer of yours. What exactly do you propose?" "A dog show. Some tricks?" His friend snickered behind him, but Sarah didn't react. She simply stood there, her posture unwavering, her eyes locked onto his. It was clear she wasn't intimidated, and that only seemed to irritate Hawk more. Sarah tilted her head slightly, her expression neutral but firm. "If you're serious about seeing what Titan and Blaze can do," she replied steadily, "then let's make this simple. One of your guys steps forward, unarmed, and tries to hold his ground against them. No weapons, no cheating, just raw skill versus raw power." She paused for effect, letting her words sink in before adding, "Of course, my dogs won't harm anyone unless I give the command. But if you want proof of their training, this is how we'll do it." The bikers erupted into laughter again, though this time there was a hint of nervousness beneath their bravado. The idea of going toe-to-toe with two large, muscular dogs, even under controlled circumstances, was enough to make some of them hesitate. Still, none of them wanted to appear weak in front of their leader. Hawk smirked, clearly enjoying the spectacle he was creating. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," he said, tapping his chest. "But fine. If you're so confident, then let's make it interesting. We'll bet on it." "A bet?" Sarah asked, raising an eyebrow. She hadn't expected this twist, but she kept her composure. "What kind of bet?" Hawk grinned, revealing a mouthful of crooked teeth. "Simple. If your mutts can take one of us down without hurting him too badly, we'll admit you're the real deal. We'll leave you alone, no hard feelings. But if they fail, or if you chicken out, we get to have a little fun messing with you whenever we feel like it. Deal?" Sarah considered the terms carefully. On one hand, she knew better than to engage in reckless behavior or put herself in unnecessary danger. Her primary responsibility was to ensure the safety of both her dogs and anyone else involved. On the other hand, this was an opportunity to teach these men a lesson, not just about her abilities, but also about respecting others regardless of appearances. After a moment of deliberation, she nodded slowly. "Deal," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the bikers. "But understand this. Once my dogs are given the command to engage, there's no stopping them until I tell them otherwise. You're playing with professionals now, so don't expect mercy." Her warning hung heavy in the air, silencing the group momentarily. Some of the bikers shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uncertain looks. Even Hawk seemed to falter for a second, though he quickly masked it with another cocky grin. "Fine by me," he said, clapping his hands together. "Who's stepping up?" One of the younger bikers, a wiry man with stringy hair and a scruffy beard, volunteered almost immediately. Known as Rattler, he prided himself on his agility and quick reflexes. Stepping forward, he cracked his knuckles and flashed a cocky smile. "Don't worry, boss," he said, flexing his arms theatrically. "I'll handle this. These dogs won't know what hit him." Sarah studied Rattler briefly, noting his overconfidence and lack of understanding about what he was truly dealing with. Without saying another word, she turned to Titan and Blaze, giving them a subtle signal to prepare. Both dogs shifted slightly, their bodies tense and alert, their eyes fixed intently on Rattler. To the untrained eye, they still looked calm, but Sarah could feel the energy radiating off them, coiled and ready to strike at her command. As the bikers gathered around, forming a loose circle around the makeshift arena, Hawk leaned in close to Sarah one last time. "Hope you're ready to eat those words, sweetheart," he whispered, his tone dripping with arrogance. Sarah didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke volumes. And deep down, Hawk couldn't shake the feeling that he might have underestimated her after all. As Sarah prepared to leave, the atmosphere in the clearing had shifted dramatically. The bikers, who moments earlier had been loud and overconfident, now stood quietly, their shoulders slumped and their expressions subdued. Hawk stepped forward, his usual bravado replaced by a look of genuine reflection. For the first time since their encounter began, he didn't try to hide his vulnerability. "Look," Hawk said, his voice softer than before, "I owe you an apology, for all of us." He glanced back at his crew, who nodded reluctantly but remained silent. "We came off as jerks, no doubt about it. We judged you based on, well, how you look. Thought you were some rookie playing soldier with a couple of big dogs. Turns out we were dead wrong." Sarah paused, her hand resting lightly on Titan's leash. She studied Hawk for a moment, searching his face for sincerity. What she saw wasn't just regret, it was humility. These men weren't used to admitting when they were wrong, especially not in front of others. Yet here they were, swallowing their pride and owning up to their mistakes. That took courage, even if it was quiet and unspoken. "You don't have to apologize," Sarah replied evenly, though her tone carried a hint of warmth. "What matters is that you learned something today. Respect isn't given because of size, strength, or reputation. It's earned through actions and understanding. And trust me, I've faced plenty of people like you who doubted me at first. But once they see what Titan and Blaze can do, they realize it's not about appearances. Hawk rubbed the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable but determined to make amends. Yeah, lesson learned, he admitted with a wry chuckle. These guys, he pointed at Titan and Blaze, who sat calmly beside Sarah, watching the exchange with sharp, intelligent eyes. They're no joke. Neither are you. Guess we won't be messing with military handlers or their dogs anytime soon. The other bikers murmured in agreement, nodding awkwardly as they processed the events of the day. One of them, a burly man with a patch-covered vest, spoke up hesitantly. Thanks for going easy on Rattler back there, he said, glancing at his friend, who still looked shaken. Could have gone worse for him if you wanted it to. Sarah gave a small, reassuring smile. Like I said, my goal wasn't to hurt anyone. It was to show you what happens when you underestimate someone. If anything, consider this a favor. Next time you're tempted to pick a fight or mock someone, remember this moment, and maybe think twice. Her words resonated deeply with the group. Even Rattler, who had initially volunteered so cockily, managed a sheepish grin. Fair enough, he muttered, scratching his head. Guess I'll stick to picking fights I can actually win. A ripple of nervous laughter passed through the bikers, breaking the tension. For the first time, they seemed almost human. Flawed, yes, but willing to learn from their missteps. Hawk extended a hand toward Sarah, his gesture hesitant but sincere. Truce, he asked, his voice steady despite the lingering embarrassment in his eyes. Sarah hesitated for only a second before reaching out to shake his hand. Her grip was firm, mirroring the same quiet authority she'd shown throughout the encounter. Truce, she agreed. Just promise me one thing. No more underestimating people. You never know who might surprise you. Hawk nodded solemnly. Deal. And hey, if you ever need help with anything around here. He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at his crew. Well, let's just say we're not totally useless. It was an unexpected offer, one that caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't expected gratitude, let alone assistance, from these men. But she recognized it for what it was. An olive branch, a way for them to prove they'd truly changed their perspective. I'll keep that in mind, she said with a faint smile. For now, though, I think Titan and Blaze have had enough excitement for one day. With that, Sarah gave a final pat to her dogs and turned to leave. As she walked away, the sound of her boots crunching against the gravel mingled with the distant hum of the bikers' engines starting up again. They didn't rev them loudly this time. Instead, the noise was subdued, almost respectful. Watching her go, Hawk shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath, "Never seen anything like it." The rest of the group mounted their bikes, casting one last glance at Sarah and her dogs before roaring off into the distance. The clearing fell silent once more, save for the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Sarah exhaled deeply, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. It wasn't every day she got to teach such a valuable lesson, and perhaps change a few minds along the way.